The sea that carried life to Carthage also carried screams. From the horizon the ships appeared like dark birds, their sails swollen with the wind of conquest. Beneath the decks, chained in rows, hundreds of men and women listened to the waves strike the wood, each crash like a heartbeat of fate. The Mediterranean sun burned above them, but inside the hold it was night, a choking dark of sweat, salt, and fear. When the ships finally approached the harbor, the city rose before them, vast and shining like a god's reflection on the sea. Towers of white stone glimmered in the sun, and the twin harbors of Carthage curved like open arms. Merchants shouted in Phoenician and Greek, priests raised censers of burning myrrh, and the smell of the market carried across the water honey, oil, wine, and blood. For Carthage, wealth was measured not only in gold or silver, but in flesh. The slaves came from everywhere, from Iberian forests, Numidian plains, Greek islands, and even from their rivals in Rome. They were currency and commodity, traded like amber or spices. The market at Byrsa Hill, where the Phoenician queen Dido was said to have first laid her cloak, had become the beating heart of this grim commerce. As the ship anchored, the overseers began shouting. Iron keys clanked and chains rattled like serpents. The first light of day filtered through the wooden slats, painting stripes across the faces of the captives. Among them was a boy, perhaps 15, with sea-green eyes dulled by exhaustion. His name was Aran. He had been taken from a small Iberian village months before. He could still remember the sound of his mother's scream, the thud of hooves and the smell of burning straw. He had seen his father struck down by a spear, and his own hands bound behind him before the fires died. Every day since, the world had shrunk to the width of his chain. When the hatch opened, blinding sunlight flooded in. Aran squinted and for the first time saw the city of his destiny, Carthage, the jewel of the sea, the city of the Red God. The slavers barked orders, driving the captives onto the docks. Men stumbled, some falling to their knees only to be whipped upright. The crowd parted to watch. Children pointed. Women with braided hair and gold rings discussed prices in low tones, as if choosing horses. Near the center of the harbor stood a man wrapped in crimson robes, a merchant, tall and lean, with the calm of someone who has seen too much to be moved. His name was Malik Azir, and to the people of Carthage he was known as the Merchant of Souls. He watched as the slaves were paraded before him. His assistants checked teeth, measured limbs, and wrote on wax tablets. Malik Azir's eyes were sharp, assessing not only strength but submission. That one, he said in Phoenician, pointing to Aran. Strong shoulders. The mines of Thapsus will take him. A scribe nodded and marked the boy's fate. The sun rose higher. On the terraces above the harbor, nobles dined beneath awnings. Musicians played lyres, their soft melodies drifting over the screams of the branded. Carthage, proud and immortal, hid its sins behind silk. Among the crowd, a young woman in a white linen dress stood apart, watching. Her name was Alyssa, daughter of a high priest of Baal Hammon, the great god of fire. Her father had forbidden her from coming here, but curiosity had burned stronger than obedience. What she saw now froze her heart. A slave girl, barely older than she, was being forced to her knees. Her back bore fresh welts, and her eyes, wide with terror, met Alyssa's across the crowd. For a moment, the world seemed to still. Two lives from opposite ends of power meeting in the space of a heartbeat. Then the brand touched flesh. The scream that followed rose over the harbor like a curse. Alyssa turned away, trembling. The scent of burning skin followed her like smoke. That night, in her father's house overlooking the temple of Tanit, she could still hear it. The walls were carved with symbols of fertility and power. Bronze lamps flickered against polished stone. Outside, the wind carried the distant hum of the city. Laughter, prayers, and the clinking of chains. Carthage was at its height, rich, invincible, adored by its gods. But beneath the gold lay rot. Aran, chained with dozens of others in an underground cell near the market, whispered to himself in his native tongue. He did not know if the gods of his people could hear him across the sea. The cell smelled of sweat and despair. Some men prayed. Others planned escape in whispers that never lasted long. One betrayal, one lash, one death. At dawn, Malik Azir descended the steps with a torch. His eyes scanned the captives. "Tomorrow," he said, "the buyers from Tyre arrive. The strong will be taken, the rest will feed the sea. He left without a glance back. Above ground, the city celebrated the festival of Tanit, goddess of love and sacrifice. Priests chanted beside roaring fires and noble families offered incense and doves. Alyssa walked among them, her mind torn between duty and doubt. Her father, solemn and proud, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You must learn to look without pity," he said. "Pity weakens the spirit. The gods gave us dominion. Mercy is for the conquered." But as she looked into the flames, she thought of the slave girl's scream, and of the boy with sea-green eyes being led away in chains. In that moment, something within her shifted, a quiet rebellion born not of rage, but of unbearable empathy. Far below in the dungeons, Aaron felt a tremor through the stone, the low, rhythmic chant of 1,000 voices calling on gods who demanded blood. He lifted his head toward the sound, and for the first time since his capture, he whispered one word, soft as breath but filled with defiance. Morning bled across Carthage like a wound reopening. The first rays of sunlight struck the white walls of the Bursa Hill Market, casting long, thin shadows through the marble colonnades. The air was heavy with incense and iron, a blend of sanctity and sin that defined the city. The slaves were brought out in groups, each chained by the neck to a single iron bar. Their feet shuffled across the dusty stones. Overseers barked commands in Phoenician and Greek, and the crack of whips punctuated the rhythm of the morning prayers echoing from the temple above. The market was alive. Merchants from Tyre and Sidon, traders from Numidia, Greek buyers from Syracuse, and a few silent Romans in cloaks all gathered beneath silk canopies, examining flesh like they would pottery. "Teeth first," shouted one trader. "Turn him the shoulders, the back," said another. Laughter mingled with groans. Malik Ezer, the merchant of souls, moved among them like a conductor among his orchestra. His crimson robes gleamed in the light, and the bronze rings on his fingers glinted as he pointed, gestured, and struck deals that would feed his fortune. His calm voice carried authority. "Lot 17, he said. "Strong arms, healed scars, and a proven fighter. Sold to the mines at Thapsus." "Lot 22, he continued, glancing at a trembling woman. "Educated. Knows Greek. Keep her for the scribe's quarter." Every human life was a calculation. Every pain a profit margin. When he reached Aaron's group, he paused. The Iberian boy stood taller than most, despite the bruises on his wrists. His eyes, defiant and green as the sea, met Malik's without flinching. "You learn quickly," Malik said in accented Greek, almost with amusement. "But you must learn silence faster. Defiance is expensive." Aaron said nothing, but Malik noticed the flicker in his gaze. Not submission, not yet. He turned away, uninterested. Later that morning, Alyssa arrived at the market again, veiled and disguised in a plain linen cloak. She had not slept. The sound of the branding iron haunted her dreams. Her father thought she was visiting the temple of Tanit, but curiosity and conscience had drawn her here again. From the upper terraces, she could see everything, the rows of captives, the endless negotiations, and the temple priests moving through the crowd to bless the transactions with holy words. May Tanit bless the strong and deliver the weak to her. Mercy. The irony stung her. She watched Malik Ezer approach a group of buyers, noblemen from Leptis Magna, men with gold in their eyes and cruelty in their smiles. One of them pointed at a child, perhaps 8 years old. "How much for that one?" Malik hesitated. "Too young for the mines. But the temple requires attendance. The goddess demands purity." The man nodded. A pouch of coins changed hands. The child was led away. Alyssa turned aside, bile rising in her throat. For the first time she understood. The gods of Carthage did not bless her people. They fed on them. That afternoon the captives were led to the washing grounds near the aqueduct, a place of ritual cleansing before auction. The sun was merciless. Men and women were stripped, scrubbed with coarse salt and splashed with cold water until their skin stung. Overseers walked among them, prodding and mocking. Aaron's chains bit into his wrists. His back burned from the lash of correction earlier that day. He gritted his teeth and endured. Beside him, a Numidian man whispered in low tones. "Do not meet their eyes," he said. "The strong ones are beaten first." Aaron nodded faintly. "And the weak?" "They are forgotten." From a distance, Alyssa watched the ritual cleansing. She had hidden behind the pillars of the aqueduct, her heart hammering. For the first time she saw what no noble was meant to see. The degradation before the sale, the casual cruelty. Her gaze fell on Aaron again. He stood still while a guard poured a bucket of water over him. When the sun hit his skin, she saw the scars, thin lines across his shoulders and arms, but his spine remained straight. Something about that quiet strength drew her in. When the auctions began, drums echoed through the plaza. Crowds gathered around raised wooden platforms where the slaves were displayed. An announcer shouted prices while Malik kept count, recording sales with the precision of a scribe. Lot 40, sold for 6 silver shekels to the house of Baal Hammon.
Lot 41.
10 shekels to the salt traders of Cyrene. Each name was swallowed by the roar of commerce. When Aaron's turn came, the crowd's noise softened. His youth and defiance intrigued them. An Iberian, Malik announced. Strong build. No deformities. Captured near the Ebro River during the spring raids. Speaks some Greek. A murmur rippled through the buyers. Someone from the mines offered 8 shekels. A merchant from Sicily countered with 9. Then a voice from the back, calm, feminine, veiled, spoke up. 10. The crowd turned. Alyssa's heart pounded beneath her cloak. Malik's eyes narrowed. He recognized her instantly, even in disguise. But he said nothing. 10 shekels. He repeated smoothly. Sold. Aaron was led away, confused, to the holding pens for private buyers. Malik followed Alyssa quietly as the crowd dispersed. When she reached the alley beside the market, he stepped into her path. Lady Alyssa, he said softly, the daughter of a priest should not play merchant. She stiffened. You will not tell my father. Malik smiled thinly. No, I have no interest in priests. But you should understand, compassion is costly in this city. The gods do not forgive those who challenge the order of their world. Her eyes hardened. Then perhaps the gods are wrong. For the first time, Malik's composure cracked, not from anger, but from something like respect. Be careful, child. Words like that have burned cities. She brushed past him without answering. That evening, as the city descended into dusk, Alyssa ordered her servant to bring the boy she had purchased to the outer courtyard of her family's estate. The servant hesitated. It was forbidden for noblewomen to interact directly with slaves, but obeyed. When Aaron was brought before her, his eyes burned with suspicion. His wrists were still bound. You bought me, he said in halting Greek. Why? Alyssa hesitated. Because I could not watch you die. He studied her, the silks, the golden bracelets, the gentleness in her tone. All of you are the same, he said bitterly. You buy mercy like you buy food. Her lips trembled. You are right, but I can give you safety, at least for now. He turned away. Safety is just another kind of cage. Silence hung between them. From the temple nearby came the echo of ritual drums, a low, unending rhythm like the heartbeat of the city. Alyssa looked toward the flames dancing in the distance. Do you hear it? She whispered. That is the sound of Carthage's heart. It never stops, even when it's killing us. Aaron looked up at her then, truly looked, and for the first time, saw not a master but a soul as lost as his own. The night wind swept through the courtyard, carrying the faint smell of salt and fire. And somewhere deep within the slave pens below the city, whispers were beginning to stir, of escape, of revolt, of gods who had turned their faces away. Night had fallen over Carthage, and the city burned with light. Torches lined the avenues leading from the harbor to the great temple of Baal Hammon. Drums thudded like thunder across the rooftops. The moon hung low and red, reflected in 1,000 bronze shields stacked along the fortress walls. Carthage was celebrating another conquest. Somewhere across the sea, another city had been taken. Another chain of captives set in motion. New bodies, new coin, new prayers of gratitude to the gods of war and fire. But inside a quiet villa overlooking the markets, Malik Ezer sat alone. His crimson robes were folded neatly beside him. Before him stood a bronze bowl filled with seawater. Floating in it was a small wax tablet, its surface inscribed with dozens of names, the ledgers of his trade. The firelight flickered across, his face revealing deep lines carved not by age but by memory. He had been a slave once. Few in Carthage knew that. He had been captured as a boy on the eastern coast, sold to a Tyrian merchant, branded, and forced to work the docks. When his first master died, the man's widow freed him. not from mercy, but because she could not bear the sight of him. Malik had taken her name, her trade, and her ruthlessness. Now, decades later, he commanded fleets and markets. The chains he once wore had become his empire. Yet in the silence of the night, the sound of clinking iron never left his ears. He reached into the bowl, touched one of the carved names, and whispered something under his breath, a prayer or perhaps an apology. Then he poured the water out onto the floor. The names vanished into the cracks of the stone. At dawn, the city stirred again. The markets reopened. The same cries, the same bargaining, the same scent of sweat and spice and despair. Alyssa had not slept. The boy she had purchased, Aaron, now worked under her household's roof, carrying water and tending the gardens. He spoke little, but every motion was precise, controlled, as if the weight of unseen chains still bound him. Alyssa watched him from the veranda, her heart heavy with questions she could not ask. Her father, the high priest Abibal, had already noticed her unease. "The gods are not pleased," he said during the morning rites. "I can feel it in the smoke. You spend too much time among the unclean." "They are not unclean," she said quietly. His gaze hardened. "Do not speak against the order of Tanit and Baal Hammon. Our city stands because we do not question the divine. Those who do—" He let the sentence hang, unfinished. The implication was enough. That evening, she walked alone toward the market district. The streets glowed red in the setting sun. The smell of roasting meat and burning resin drifted from the temple fires. Malik was there, overseeing a new shipment. "Lady Alyssa," he greeted her, his voice low but steady. "I had not expected your return. I came to speak of the boy." "Your purchase?" He raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem?" "There is a sickness in him," she said. "Not of the body, of the soul. He carries hatred like a weapon." Malik's smile was bitter. "Hatred is what keeps the conquered alive. It is the only fire that burns without fuel." "I want to free him," she said suddenly. The words hung between them like a blade. Malik turned sharply. "Do you understand what you're saying? The law forbids it without decree. You would shame your house. Your father would be stripped of his priesthood, and the boy—" He paused. "He would be hunted down and sold again within a week." Alyssa clenched her fists. "Then what is freedom worth, if it is only a word that no one can use?" Malik studied her face. In her defiance, he saw something he had once known, a glimmer of conscience buried beneath the ruins of power. He sighed. "Come with me." He led her through the back alleys of the market, where the light dimmed and the smell of rot replaced incense. Behind the main plaza stood a low building of stone and cedar, its door sealed by iron rings. Malik unlocked it with a key from around his neck. Inside was silence. Rows upon rows of wooden tablets lined the walls, records of every sail, every ship, every life that had passed through his hands. "This," he said, "is Carthage's true temple. Here are the offerings we make to our gods, not grain or gold, but souls." Alyssa ran her fingers along the carved names, hundreds, thousands. "You keep them all?" "Someone must remember," he said. "Because the city will not." She turned to him, her voice trembling. "You hate what you do." Malik looked past her toward the window where the faint glow of the harbor fire flickered. "I hate what must be done. There is no power in Carthage without cruelty. The gods demand it. The council enforces it. I merely choose who suffers least." Alyssa's voice rose, quiet but fierce. "Then you could choose not to." He laughed, softly without joy. "And see my slaves replaced by those who enjoy the lash? No, Lady Alyssa. The city does not change. It devours the merciful first." He turned away, but she saw something crack behind his eyes, a shadow of the boy he once was. "Go home," he said finally. "Forget what you've seen. And if you value that boy's life, keep him hidden. The temple will demand sacrifices soon. and the markets always grow hungrier before the fires are lit. That night, the moon vanished behind storm clouds. In the lower quarters of the city, whispers ran through the slave pens. A Numidian guard had spoken of the coming festival, a grand sacrifice to Tanit to bless the new season of trade. The rumor spread like wildfire that some slaves were chosen not for labor but for the pyres. When Aaron heard it, something inside him broke. He had seen his village burned, his family slain, his freedom stolen. Now he saw that Carthage was not simply a city. It was a machine that fed on human lives. He began to plan. In the darkness, he gathered a handful of others, men from Libya, women from Sicily, a Greek scribe whose fingers were raw from copying scrolls. "When the fires rise," he whispered, "they will be watching the sky, not the ground. That is when we run." They nodded, their eyes hollow but burning with hope. Above them, thunder rolled across the sea. In her chamber, Alyssa knelt before the small household altar. The statue of Tanit stared back, serene, eternal, unblinking. Alyssa's hands shook. "Great goddess," she whispered, "if you are truly merciful, turn your eyes from us, for we have forgotten how to see each other." A gust of wind blew through the open window, extinguishing the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room. Somewhere below, the drums began again, slower this time, heavier. The festival was coming, and so was the reckoning. The city of Carthage awoke beneath a sky the color of iron. The sea was restless. Wind drove waves against the harbor walls, scattering spray over the marble statues of gods who never blinked. Drums echoed from the temple district, a slow, gathering rhythm that made the cobblestones tremble. The festival of Tanit had begun. It was the season of supplication, when the city renewed its covenant with the gods, offering gifts, incense, and, beneath the flicker of sacred fire, lives. The wealthiest families paraded their offerings through the streets, white doves, lambs, golden bowls of oil. But in the darker courtyards of the temple, the chosen slaves were being prepared. Aaron had heard the rumors for days. Now he saw the truth. From the slave pens near the market, groups were being selected by robed priests. The chosen were adorned with garlands and painted with red ochre, symbols of purity before sacrifice. The air reeked of terror. He crouched near the wall, whispering to the others. "Tonight," he said, "when the fire rises, we move. Stay low, stay silent. We reach the harbor before dawn." A Greek scribe named Diodon shook his head. "Even if we reach the ships, who will sail us? They guard every dock." Aaron met his eyes. "Then we learn." There was no time for more. The guards were coming. High above, on the terraces of the temple, Alyssa stood beside her father, dressed in ceremonial linen dyed with saffron. The wind tugged at her veil. From this height, the city stretched below her like a living thing. Streets pulsing with people, harbors shining like molten gold, and the black smoke of the market rising into the sky. Her father, High Priest Abibal, lifted his arms to the heavens. "Great Tanit, Mother of the Stars, accept our offerings. Bless our city and our kings." The crowd roared. Alyssa's stomach turned. She could see the lower altars, the priests arranging the holy attendants, the slaves who would be offered to fire. Among them, she thought she glimpsed a familiar shape, tall, wiry, with hair the color of bronze. Aaron. Her pulse quickened. She turned to her father. "They're using the unblessed slaves, the new captives. That breaks the law of the rights." Abibal's face remained composed. "The gods care for devotion, not details. Do not question the priests, but they are people." He glanced at her sharply. "Be silent." The goddess listens. Alyssa's hands trembled. The chanting below grew louder. She saw Malik Ezer among the council, standing near the altar's edge, his face unreadable. When his gaze met hers, something passed between them, a warning, or perhaps a plea. That night, as the torches flared and the chants rose, Malik approached the temple's inner court. He had seen this ritual 100 times. The sacred fires roaring, the drums, the smoke. It was always the same theater of power. But tonight, the sight of the bound captives struck him differently. He saw their faces not as merchandise but as mirrors of his own past. The wind carried a familiar sound, chains clinking like distant bells. He turned. startled to find Alyssa standing behind a column, her face pale beneath the torchlight. "What are you doing here?" he hissed. Her eyes were wild. "He's there, the boy." "They'll burn him." Malik's jaw tightened. "Then pray for him." "You cannot stop the goddess." "I can try." Before he could stop her, she slipped away toward the altar. The ritual was beginning. Priests chanted around the central pit, tossing handfuls of cedar and resin into the flames. The crowd swayed in rhythm, their voices a sea of fervor. One by one, the chosen captives were brought forward. Alyssa moved quickly through the shadows, her heart pounding. She reached Aaron's group near the lower steps. A guard turned, startled. She struck him with a fallen torch, sparks exploding around them. "Run!" she shouted. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. The captives surged forward, breaking their bindings, scattering through the temple courtyard. Flames caught on the silk banners, turning the air red. Drums faltered, replaced by screams. Aaron seized Alyssa's arm. "This way!" They ran through the smoke, dodging panicked priests and collapsing timbers. Malik, seeing the chaos unfold, froze for an instant, then followed. He knew what would come next. The guards would seal the gates. Below, the city roared awake. Bells clanged from towers. The Council of Elders ordered the harbor closed. Torches flared along the streets as soldiers marched toward the temple. Aaron and Alyssa slipped through an alley near the aqueduct, their breaths ragged. The air smelled of salt and fire. "Why did you do that?" he demanded. "You could have lived. You had everything." Alyssa's reply was a whisper. "I couldn't watch them die. I couldn't be like the rest." He stared at her, uncertain whether to curse or thank her. "You don't understand. There's no escape from Carthage. Then we'll make one." From behind them, Malik's voice cut through the dark. "Not that way." "The guards are coming. They turned. He was there, cloak torn, his face streaked with soot. You're helping us?" Aaron asked, disbelieving. Malik's smile was grim. "Once someone helped me. It's time I repaid the debt." He led them through the narrow service tunnels that ran beneath the market, the same tunnels once used to smuggle goods and flesh. The stone dripped with condensation and the sound of the sea grew louder. When they reached the end, Malik stopped before an iron grate. Beyond this, the outer docks. There are boats hidden under the pier. Take one and go west. The current will carry you to Numidia if you're lucky. Alyssa touched his arm. "Come with us," he shook his head. "I built this city's hunger. I will not run from it." Then, before either could protest, he pushed the grate open and stepped back. "Go." Aaron hesitated. "Why help us now?" Malik looked past him toward the faint glow of fire above. "Because I am tired of selling ghosts." They slipped through the opening and disappeared into the night. By dawn, Carthage burned. The temple fires had spread through the upper district. The priests called it divine wrath. The council called it rebellion. The city's streets were filled with soldiers dragging prisoners back to the pens. Malik was taken at dawn. When Abibal, the high priest, saw him brought before the council, he demanded, "Why did you betray the goddess?" Malik met his gaze without fear. "The goddess never asked for slaves." "You did." He was sentenced before the sun rose, his fortune confiscated, his name erased. But even as the guards led him to the dungeons, a strange calm settled over him. He had seen 2 souls escape Carthage. One slave, one daughter of its gods. Perhaps that was enough. Far beyond the harbor, a small fishing boat rocked on the open water. Aaron rowed while Alyssa held the tiller, her hands blistered, her eyes fixed on the burning horizon. Neither spoke. The city that had ruled the sea was now a black silhouette against the dawn, smoke rising like a final offering to gods that no longer listened. When the first light touched their faces, Alyssa whispered, "Do you think they'll follow us?" Aaron shook his head. "No, they'll say we died in the fire." She nodded slowly. "Then let them believe it." The waves carried them westward toward an unknown shore, toward freedom that might not yet exist. But for the first time, the word remember did not sound like a curse, it sounded like hope. The sea that once sang to Carthage now groaned beneath smoke and ash. By the third dawn after the uprising, the harbor was choked with wreckage, charred beams, shattered amphorae, the blackened hulls of ships. The great city that had ruled the Mediterranean for centuries lay wounded. Flames still licked at the ruins of the temple quarter, painting the sky red even in daylight. The people whispered that Tanit herself had turned her face away. Inside the council chamber on Bursa Hill, the elders gathered. Their robes were stained with soot, their faces hollow with fear. "Contain the rumors," one demanded. "The slaves must be made example of." Another hissed. "The gods require atonement," shouted a third. High Priest Abibal raised his hands for silence. His voice was ragged but still carried the weight of centuries. "We have angered the heavens," he declared. "Our sacrifices have grown impure. We must cleanse the city with fire." There was no dissent, only the heavy, resigned nods of men who had long forgotten mercy. Beneath the council's feet, in the dungeons of the old fortress, Malik Ezer listened to the muffled echoes above. His wrists were chained, his body bruised, but his mind was sharp as ever. He had spent his life serving the machine of Carthage, feeding it flesh, counting its coins, justifying its cruelty as order. Now that machine was eating itself. He smiled bitterly. "Perhaps the gods have better accountants than I." The door opened. 2 guards entered, torches in hand. "By order of the council, you are to be brought to the altar of purification," one said. Malik rose slowly. "At last," he murmured. "A proper title for execution." They led him through the corridors toward the temple. The air was thick with smoke, heavy with the smell of burning cedar. Outside, thousands gathered in fearful silence. From the cliffs beyond the city, the view was both terrible and beautiful. Elissa and Aaron watched from afar, hidden among the rocks, their small boat anchored below in a narrow cove. They had returned under cover of fog, drawn by the glow that refused to die on the horizon. Carthage still burned. "Why did we come back?" Aaron asked quietly. "Because it isn't finished," Elissa said. "He's still there." "You mean the merchant?" She nodded. "He saved us. We can't leave him to burn." Aaron looked back toward the city, the harbor, the spires, the great temple whose flames reached like fingers into the clouds. "That place is cursed. No one walks into it and leaves alive." Elissa's eyes hardened. "Then I will walk in alone." He caught her wrist. "No. If you go, I go." Inside the temple, Malik was dragged before the high altar. Abibal stood above him, framed by the colossal statue of Tanit, her stone hands outstretched. Between them burned the eternal flame, or what remained of it flickering in the smoke. "Malik Ezer," Abibal intoned, "you are condemned for heresy, rebellion, and sacrilege. Do you deny these charges?" Malik raised his head, his voice hoarse but steady. "No, I only deny your gods." A murmur rippled through the priests. Abibal's face twisted. "Blasphemer. You will feed the fire you defied." Malik met his eyes. "The fire was never yours." Before Abibal could reply, a distant crash shook the temple. The great bronze doors burst open, and a gust of wind swept through, scattering ash like snow. 2 figures stood in the entrance, cloaked, half blinded by smoke. "Stop." Elissa's voice rang out. The priests froze. Abibal turned, his expression collapsing into disbelief. "Elissa?" She stepped forward, pulling back her hood. "Release him. You shame your bloodline." He thundered. "You stand with traitors and slaves." "I stand with the living," she said. At her side, Aaron raised a fallen spear from the floor, the metal gleaming in the firelight. "No one else dies for your gods," he said. Voice low and certain, the priests surged forward, and chaos ignited. The next moments unfolded in a storm of light and sound. Elissa seized a torch and hurled it into the tapestries lining the walls. Fire leapt upward, devouring silk and cedar. Aaron fought with desperate precision, striking to wound, not to kill, every movement driven by instinct and fury. Malik, still chained, used the distraction to lunge at a fallen guard, wrenching free a dagger. He cut his bonds with shaking hands. Abibal's shouts drowned beneath the roar of collapsing beams. The statue of Tanit loomed above them, her serene stone face cracking under the heat. "Elissa," Malik shouted. "The roof, go!" They ran through the smoke-choked corridors, the temple collapsing behind them. A massive pillar fell, blocking the main exit. Aaron turned, coughing, searching for another way. "There!" Malik pointed to a side passage, one of the old smuggler routes that wound beneath the temple toward the harbor. They stumbled into the tunnel as the roof caved in, sealing the chamber behind them. Above, the statue of Tanit crumbled, her head shattering upon the altar. The eternal flame burst outward, sending a column of fire through the open ceiling. From the city below, it looked as if the goddess herself had fallen. By dawn, the temple was gone. Smoke rose in black columns across Bursa Hill. The people fled their homes. The council vanished. The harbor was silent, not a sail in sight. Carthage had devoured itself. Among the ruins near the sea, a hidden door opened. 3 figures emerged, covered in ash and blood. Malik coughed violently, his strength fading. "Go," he told them. "The ship, take one. Leave this place to the sand." Alyssa tried to help him stand, but he pushed her hand away. "I am already dead, child. But you can carry truth farther than I ever could." She shook her head, tears cutting through the soot on her face. "What truth?" He smiled faintly. "That mercy can burn brighter than any fire." Then, before either could speak, the ground trembled again. The final collapse of the temple sent a shockwave through the ruins. Aaron grabbed Alyssa and dragged her toward the shore. When they turned back, Malik was gone, swallowed by the dust and flame. They reached the beach as the sun broke through the smoke. The sky was crimson and gold, the same colors that once adorned Carthage's banners. Aaron pulled one of the small fishing boats from the wreckage, and together they pushed it into the tide. Behind them, the once great city smoldered. Alyssa looked back one last time. The wind carried her voice over the waves. "May the world remember," she whispered. Aaron placed a hand on her shoulder. "It will, because we lived." The waves caught their boat and carried them west, away from the ruins, away from the gods, toward an unknown shore where memory could become something new. The wind still sang through the ruins. Centuries had passed, yet the ghosts of Carthage refused to sleep. The sea had swallowed the harbors, the desert had claimed the gardens, and time had buried the temples under dunes of silence. But when the evening light fell across the old stones, the city seemed to breathe again, a faint shimmer of gold beneath the dust, like embers remembering what it was to burn. A group of travelers climbed the ridge overlooking the bay. Among them was a young scholar named Lucius Varro, sent from Rome to map the ruins. He was barely 30, curious and gentle-faced, his hands more accustomed to parchment than sword. His guide, an old Numidian named Hanno, pointed toward the broken columns ahead. "There," he said. "That was Bursa Hill, the heart of Carthage. The Romans tore it down, stone by stone." Lucius squinted at the horizon. "And beneath?" "Beneath," Hanno said. "The gods they tried to erase." They reached the summit by dusk. The view stretched endlessly, the blue-gray sea to the north, the red dunes to the south. The ruins glowed faintly in the setting sun. Lucius knelt and brushed his fingers across a fragment of carved marble. It was etched with a faint spiral, the symbol of Tanit, the moon goddess once worshipped with fire and blood. He frowned. "They said the Romans destroyed her temples." "They destroyed what they could see," Hanno murmured. "But the city beneath, the city remembers." That night, as the others slept, Lucius wandered the ruins alone. His torch flickered, painting the shadows of fallen pillars and broken statues. Somewhere in the darkness, the wind moved like a whispering voice, soft, almost human. He followed it to a half-buried archway, half hidden by sand and vines. Ancient letters lined the lintel, Punic script faded but legible. He leaned closer, tracing them with his hand. "To those who were not meant to be remembered." The words sent a chill through him. He descended into the darkness. The steps were old, worn smooth by countless feet. The air grew colder with each turn. Finally, he entered a chamber, vast, circular, with walls carved from stone blackened by age and fire. At its center stood a crumbling altar. Around it were hundreds of clay tablets, sealed in dust. Lucius knelt and lifted one. The script was Punic, old, fluid, lyrical. He began to read. "My name was Alyssa. Not the queen they remember, but one born in her shadow. I write this so that the world may know what Carthage became, and how its fire devoured the innocent." Lucius froze. The words were fragile, the ink ancient, yet the emotion leapt from the clay like living breath. He read on. "We thought ourselves chosen by gods, yet we were slaves to their hunger. I saw men and women sold as cattle in the market of the sun, and priests who burned children to please the stars. When the fire came, we thought it was punishment, but it was mercy, the kind that ends what should never have begun. Lucius swallowed hard. His torch trembled. The story continued. Fragments of a life he could almost see. A boy named Aaron showed me that mercy could live even in chains. A merchant named Malik taught me that guilt can build altars higher than gold. And when the city fell, I carried their memory across the sea. I buried this truth beneath the stones, so that one day someone would find it and remember. The torch sputtered, throwing long shadows across the walls. For a moment Lucius thought he heard voices, faint, distant, as if the chamber itself was speaking. He looked up. Across the wall, faint carvings glowed in the torchlight, depictions of the slave markets, the temple, the fire. At the center stood 3 figures, a woman, a young man, and an older one holding a ledger that burned in his hands. Their eyes seemed alive, carved with such sorrow that Lucius felt his chest tighten. He whispered, Elissa, Aaron, Malik. The names felt like prayers. He carried one of the tablets back to the surface. The dawn was rising, pale gold over the ruins. Hanno waited by the campfire. When Lucius showed him the tablet, the old man's face turned grave. You found it, he said quietly. Lucius frowned. You knew? I was born not far from here, Hanno said. My grandmother told stories of a woman who fled the fire, who crossed the sea to the islands carrying secrets no one dared speak. He pointed to the horizon. She said the sea still keeps her name. Lucius looked out over the waves. They shimmered, endless and calm. He imagined a small boat on that water, 2 figures rowing west, leaving behind a city of smoke and gods. He turned back to Hanno. The Romans erased Carthage from history. They said nothing of this. The old man smiled faintly. History belongs to the victors. Memory belongs to the dead. In the days that followed, Lucius gathered as many tablets as he could carry. He copied the inscriptions carefully, every name, every plea, every cry that had been buried beneath the sand. When he returned to Rome months later, he presented his findings to the scholars of the Forum. They dismissed him at once. Fabrications, one said. Punic myths, said another. A trick of translation. Lucius stood silent, realizing that history was not written by those who found the truth, but by those who owned it. He left the city soon after, disappearing from the record. But, before he went, he hid the tablets in a monastery by the sea, sealing them in a chest of cedar and bronze. On its lid he carved a single line, "The ashes remember." 2,000 years later, archaeologists unearthed that chest near the ruins of modern Tunis. Inside were the tablets of Elissa, fragments of her story, still legible after centuries of silence. And so at last Carthage spoke again, not of empire or trade, not of kings or generals, but of the unseen, the forgotten, the enslaved. The markets of flesh and gold that once made her great had long turned to dust. But their echoes lingered, in the blood beneath the stones, in the wind over the ruins, in the names whispered by the sea. When the sun sets over Carthage now, it bathes the city in red and gold, the colors of its fire, the colors of its remorse. And if you listen closely, you might still hear them, the voices that history tried to erase.